Envision a product so potent that it generates wealth without producing anything tangible. An entity so elusive that most individuals remain unaware of its presence in their daily lives. This product is debt. Far from being a neutral financial instrument, debt has been deliberately transformed into the most lucrative commodity in human history. It has financed wars, toppled empires, enslaved nations, and quietly drained the resources of ordinary people. Yet, if you were to inquire of the average person about the origins of debt, who invented it, and why it holds such dominance within our financial framework, they would likely falter. The narrative of debt transcends mere economics. It intertwines with the very fabric of money and power itself. At its core, debt represents a promise, a commitment to borrow today and repay tomorrow. However, within this simple agreement lies the essence of financial control: interest rates. The charging of interest transforms future obligations into present profits. For thousands of years, societies have grappled with this notion. In ancient Mesopotamia, debts were inscribed on clay tablets but were periodically erased during debt jubilees, as rulers recognized that when too many citizens fell under the weight of debts, societal collapse was imminent. For the first time, governments were not merely accruing debt as a means of responding to emergencies. They began to rely on it as a standard method of operation, perpetually extending their financial obligations. Consequently, bankers who managed this burgeoning debt became indispensable allies to the monarchy. Debt transitioned from being merely private agreements between individuals into a foundational element of state authority itself. The profits generated from these financial maneuvers were staggering. Lending to governments was considered the safest investment in the financial realm since states had the power to raise taxes to meet their obligations. Wars that once threatened to bankrupt monarchs could now be funded without limits. These conflicts, in turn, expanded empires, opened new markets, and created further opportunities for incurring debt. It formed an ideal cycle. As nations engaged in warfare, their debts grew larger. With increased borrowing came greater wealth for their creditors. By the 18th and 19th centuries, bond markets in London, Paris, and Amsterdam had become the pulsating heart of global finance. Armies marched forth, ships set sail, and colonies were seized, all financed through borrowed capital. However, this phenomenon extended beyond mere state affairs. As industrial capitalism spread its wings, ordinary citizens were drawn into this cycle as well. Railroads, factories, and infrastructure projects were constructed using credit sourced from bonds and bank loans. Workers received wages from companies funded by debt and subsequently took on loans themselves to purchase homes, tools for their trades, and ultimately consumer goods. Debt infiltrated every layer of economic life. By the 20th century, borrowing transformed from being solely a tool used by governments or magnates into a commonplace commodity available to the masses. Mortgages, auto loans, credit cards, and student loans became integral components of everyday life, each representing a normalization of borrowing as an unspoken condition for existence. Within this intricate system lies either a hidden genius or perhaps a concealed cruelty. Debt does not simply create wealth once, but rather facilitates an ongoing transfer of riches from borrowers to lenders. Every interest payment becomes a repeated transaction where wealth flows from those who owe money to those who hold it, a cycle that continues month after month and year after year. This essential aspect highlights how deeply embedded debt has become within our society's fabric. Understanding this dynamic reveals both the reliance on credit that drives modern economies and poses questions about sustainability in an ever-expanding financial landscape. Unlike a product that you purchase once for immediate use, debt is designed to be an ongoing burden, ensnaring individuals in an endless cycle of payments. For instance, a home bought through a 30-year mortgage can end up costing 2 to 3 times its original price. A credit card bill that rolls over month after month may increase at a rate faster than one's ability to pay it off. What initially appears as a helpful promise morphs into a daunting trap. Thus, debt transcends mere financial agreement. It represents one of the most successful business models throughout history. It requires no factories, no inventory, and no raw materials, yet it generates wealth from the very fabric of time itself. Those who first grasped this concept, traders in Amsterdam, bankers in London, and Wall Street financiers, became the architects of our modern financial landscape. This system does not merely manage existing debt. It actively creates, expands, and relies on debt for its survival. By the mid-20th century, debt evolved from being a tool reserved for emergencies to becoming the lifeblood of the global financial system. The Bretton Woods Conference in 1944 was heralded as a new dawn for international collaboration, but concealed within its lofty rhetoric was a straightforward mechanism: debt as discipline. Countries were permitted to take loans, but only under stringent conditions dictated by their creditors. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, dominated by the United States and European powers, began imposing structural adjustment requirements alongside its loans. Entire national economies were directed on what to cut, what to privatize, and how to restructure their budgets. Debt transformed from merely being lucrative. It became an instrument of political control. Nations that borrowed excessively found their sovereignty compromised, with policies being rewritten not in their own capitals but rather in Washington, D.C. or Basel. The narrative was framed around stability and growth. However, the reality revealed an intricate web of dependency. Concurrently, in the everyday lives of ordinary citizens, a quieter revolution unfolded. Over decades following World War II, banks discovered innovative methods to sell debts not just to governments and corporations but directly to households as well. Mortgages emerged as the crown jewel of middle-class aspirations. The Hebrew Bible mandates forgiveness of debts every 50 years. The underlying principle was straightforward. Unchecked debts could enslave entire populations and destabilize communities, if not managed properly. As we traverse through centuries of history, we observe how elites adapted to use debts not as burdens to forgive but as powerful instruments for manipulation. In medieval Europe, the Catholic Church imposed an official ban on usury, the practice of charging exorbitant interest, but merchants and bankers found creative ways to circumvent these restrictions. Homeownership, which was once exclusively available to the elite class, suddenly became attainable for millions, but only after families signed contracts binding them to repay loans over 30 years. This shift altered societal dynamics significantly. Many families found themselves ensnared in long-term commitments that demanded both financial sacrifice and emotional resilience. As this trend continued to evolve, consumer culture blossomed alongside rising debt levels. Credit cards became ubiquitous tools for managing everyday expenses but also served as gateways to accumulating more debt than individuals could reasonably manage. With each swipe came the allure of instant gratification but also the shadow of impending financial obligations. In this complex dance between aspiration and obligation, society's relationship with money transformed dramatically. The initial excitement surrounding newfound access to credit soon gave way to anxiety as families grappled with mounting debts that felt insurmountable. The dream of homeownership turned into a double-edged sword. While it promised stability and security, it also tethered countless individuals to a future bound by financial uncertainty. Through these changes emerged critical questions about economic structures and personal agency. As people navigated this labyrinthine world shaped by indebtedness, they began seeking ways to reclaim control over their financial destinies amid pressures exerted by larger systems at play. Ultimately, this journey illustrates the profound impact of debt, not just on individual lives but on societies at large, reflecting deeper truths about ambition and vulnerability within our globalized economy. Auto loans, installment plans for furniture, and the widespread use of credit cards have transformed debt into a commodity, marketed just like any other product. This psychological shift was monumental. Debt ceased to be something shameful or rare. Rather, it became a common avenue for participating in prosperity. The mantra of buy now, pay later emerged, allowing individuals to enjoy life in the present while deferring concerns about financial repercussions to an uncertain future. For financial institutions, this evolution represented a windfall. Interest earned from millions of households generated steady and increasing profits. Governments also benefited from this new paradigm by fostering an illusion of perpetual growth, as consumer demand could be fueled by credit even amidst stagnant wages. Corporations enjoyed a reliable stream of customers who were tempted to spend money they did not yet possess, further entrenching this cycle. Thus, debt evolved into the hidden engine driving contemporary capitalism. Unlike the sale of tangible goods, the distribution of credit proved infinitely scalable. There was no need for mines or factories, only signatures, contracts, and the authority to create money from promises. However, the inherent danger lay in the system's growing reliance on expansion. Banks preferred that debts linger rather than being swiftly repaid. They thrived on extensions, refinancing, and prolonging obligations. The longer individuals remained in debt, the more lucrative it became for lenders. Governments learned that borrowing was simpler than raising taxes. Politicians could pledge immediate benefits while shifting expenses onto future generations. Central banks wielded the power to create money and facilitated all of this by ensuring continuous liquidity to maintain systemic functionality. Debt transitioned from being a temporary bridge to becoming a permanent fixture within the financial architecture. By the 1970s and 80s, the consequences of this dependence had become glaringly evident. Countries across Latin America, Africa, and Asia eagerly borrowed during periods of economic boom, encouraged by Western banks eager to recycle oil dollars following oil shocks. When interest rates surged under Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker's leadership, many of these nations suddenly found themselves unable to service their debts. This scenario culminated in a debt crisis in 1982 when Mexico declared its insolvency. The response? New loans with far stricter conditions imposed by entities such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank would follow. These measures often led to harsh austerity policies that impacted entire populations and sparked widespread social unrest. As nations struggled under the weight of their financial obligations, it became evident that what began as a tool for economic participation had morphed into a source of vulnerability and instability. The intricate web woven by debt highlighted the fragility of economies reliant on continued growth fueled by borrowed money, a reality that continues to resonate in global finance today. They disguised loans as trade agreements or crafted intricate financial instruments that resembled anything but traditional borrowing. By the time the Renaissance dawned, influential banking families like the Medicis in Florence had built thriving empires not through land or military might but via lending practices. They provided capital to kings, popes, and traders alike, gaining not only wealth in return but also substantial political leverage. Debt became a snare. Individuals borrowed money to survive, only to find themselves taking on additional loans just to pay off the previous ones. With each cycle, they lost more grip on their financial stability. Ordinary citizens faced severe austerity measures, soaring inflation, and rampant unemployment while the elite and creditors reaped the rewards in the form of interest payments. In developed nations, the financial sector discovered innovative methods for packaging and marketing debt. Mortgages, auto loans, and corporate bonds were bundled together into tradable securities, enabling them to be exchanged globally. Debt evolved from a simple agreement between a borrower and a lender into a commodity in its own right, one that could be sliced, diced, and sold to investors around the world. Wall Street began shifting focus from producing goods to devising complex debt instruments. This phenomenon, referred to as financialization, transformed credit into one of the most vital commodities of our modern era. The profits generated from this transformation were astounding. A bank could issue a loan, sell it off to investors, and quickly move on to issuing another loan while collecting fees at every stage of the process. Though it appeared that risk was spread widely across various entities, it was merely concealed, lying in wait for the next financial crisis to expose its true nature. The financial collapse of 2008 was an inevitable outcome of these practices. Trillions of dollars worth of mortgage-backed securities, which had been created under the assumption that American homeowners would not collectively default, imploded spectacularly. The scale of debt had expanded beyond realistic limits, and when it ultimately collapsed, it sent shockwaves through the global financial system. Governments intervened not with intentions to penalize those responsible for peddling toxic debts, but rather to rescue them, once again illustrating for whom this entire system truly functioned. Meanwhile, countless families lost their homes, jobs, and savings as banks received bailouts without hesitation. Once the dust settled from this chaos, borrowing did not diminish. Instead, it surged further. The very crisis fueled by excessive debt prompted even greater reliance on borrowing through interventions by central banks and historically low interest rates. Debt transitioned from being merely profitable. It became essential for survival within the global economy. Governments depended on it to finance deficits. Corporations utilized it for stock buybacks. Households relied on it to sustain their standard of living. Without continual borrowing practices in place, the entire system would collapse under its own weight. Ultimately, debt emerged as a product upon which everything else hinged, a product capable of infinite sales, extensions, and inflationary growth. As society navigated through this intricate web of financial dependencies, one question lingered. How long could this unsustainable model endure before facing another reckoning? This business model appeared flawless, as it required no innovations or physical investments, relying solely on the trust of borrowers and the protection of governments. Following the financial crisis in 2008, central banks drastically reduced interest rates to near zero and flooded the system with liquidity, promising that this miraculous remedy would restore stability. In reality, however, such measures only deepened dependency within the financial ecosystem. The availability of cheap credit encouraged governments, corporations, and households alike to take on even larger debts. The statistics are staggering. Currently, global debt exceeds $300 trillion, more than triple the annual output of the world economy. Never before in human history has a small number of entities held such immense obligations over so many. Ironically, this mountain of commitments is often presented as growth. Politicians point to increasing GDP figures while quietly acknowledging that a significant portion is merely borrowed from future earnings. Debt has become so normalized that skepticism about it has nearly vanished from public discourse. A 20-year-old may take out a student loan amounting to tens of thousands of dollars, marketed as an investment in his future. Meanwhile, a couple enters into a 30-year mortgage agreement under the impression that they are fulfilling their dreams. Year after year, governments grapple with deficits that voters hardly notice because the repercussions fail to manifest in the short term. Inflation acts as a hidden tax that facilitates debt repayment by subtly eroding the purchasing power of currency held by individuals while maintaining the nominal strength of the debt structure. What appears to be prosperity is frequently nothing more than leverage stacked upon additional leverage. Nonetheless, profits derived from debt have never been higher. Banks not only earn interest on each loan but also develop entire industries focused on servicing debt, refinancing, collection efforts, and restructuring. Debt evolved beyond a mere financial tool. It became a critical engine driving power dynamics across societies. A significant shift occurred in the 17th century with the rise of public debt. As the Dutch Republic fought for independence from Spain, it sought funds by issuing bonds to its citizens. Investors could purchase these government bonds, earning interest while also engaging in trading them as though they were physical properties. Investors accumulate substantial wealth by trading sovereign bonds, betting on the creditworthiness of entire nations. Hedge funds often speculate on distressed debts, profiting from the misfortunes of bankrupt countries or struggling corporations. Rating agencies, which are ostensibly neutral arbiters in this complex system, act as intermediaries determining who can borrow at favorable rates and who must pay higher premiums due to perceived risk. Debt transcends being merely a financial product. It represents an entire market where promises are evaluated, traded, and exploited for profit. Perhaps the most striking aspect of this intricate system lies in its ability to concentrate wealth so effectively. Each interest payment represents a transfer of resources from debtor to creditor, facilitating an ongoing cycle where wealth increasingly accumulates among those who already possess it. This dynamic not only raises questions about fairness but also highlights systemic vulnerabilities that could lead to instability in times of economic stress. As individuals navigate their financial lives amidst these complexities, they often find themselves trapped in cycles of indebtedness without fully grasping their implications. The allure of easy credit can obscure long-term consequences, creating an environment where living beyond means becomes commonplace for many households striving for upward mobility. Yet understanding this landscape is crucial for making informed decisions about borrowing and spending habits in an increasingly interconnected world marked by financial intricacies. In essence, while debt might seem like a pathway to opportunities for some, it can equally serve as a double-edged sword that perpetuates inequality and dependence on fragile systems designed primarily for profit rather than equitable growth or sustainable development. Thus, examining these dynamics reveals much about contemporary society's values and priorities regarding finance and economic well-being, a reflection not just on individual choices but on collective societal structures at large. Over time, financial resources become concentrated at the top, shifting from millions of households managing credit card bills and mortgages to the vast coffers of major banks and investment funds. Debt does not merely generate profit. It reshapes society, entrenching inequality in its wake. Those who possess assets can borrow at lower rates, allowing them to acquire even more wealth, amplifying their fortunes exponentially. Meanwhile, individuals without assets often resort to high-cost loans, becoming ensnared in relentless repayment cycles. Debt acts as a reflection of class division, polished and legitimized by the financial system that upholds it. As central banks begin exploring the realm of central bank digital currencies, we stand on the brink of a new phase in the evolution of debt. Envision a future where money is programmable, monitored, and controlled down to the very code it operates on. Imagine loans being approved or denied automatically based on algorithms designed to assess risk with impeccable precision. Interest rates could be adjusted in real time, while penalties are applied instantaneously for any transgressions. To many, this notion appears to embody efficiency. However, history teaches us that what may be deemed efficient for lenders translates into diminished freedom for borrowers. The most lucrative financial product ever conceived is undergoing modernization for the digital age, and once again it will be crafted behind closed doors in committees and conferences far removed from public scrutiny. So what lesson emerges from this reality? It underscores that debt is anything but neutral. It is not merely a tool for progress or an inherent aspect of contemporary living. Debt has been deliberately nurtured as one of the most profitable products ever created. A mechanism that turns time itself into currency and transforms individual aspirations and national challenges into streams of interest payments flowing upward toward those at the top. To comprehend debt is to realize that true financial freedom cannot simply be handed down by a system that thrives on keeping you perpetually indebted. Genuine wealth entails minimizing reliance on borrowed funds, rethinking the allure of easy credit, and recognizing that every loan offer is backed by a machine engineered to extract profit from your future earnings. History may not repeat itself precisely, but patterns invariably emerge across different epochs. From ancient clay tablets in Mesopotamia to suburban mortgage loans, from the Dutch bond market to Wall Street derivatives, the narrative remains consistent. Debt enriches creditors while burdening debtors, altering the world in favor of those who wield control over monetary flows. The cruelest irony lies in how society conditions us to celebrate debt as progress, equating borrowing with prosperity and viewing loans as pathways to success rather than potential traps leading to greater hardship. In this intricate web of finance, understanding one's position becomes crucial, not just as an individual navigating personal finances, but as a participant in a broader economic landscape shaped by forces beyond our immediate perception. This innovative approach set a precedent for modern finance by allowing governments to tap into public resources for funding their endeavors, while simultaneously creating new avenues for investment opportunities among citizens. Such practices laid the groundwork for complex financial systems we navigate today, systems where debt is intricately woven into both personal finances and national economies. Ultimately, confronting these realities empowers individuals to break free from cycles of indebtedness and reevaluate their relationships with money. By cultivating awareness around the systems at play and advocating for more equitable financial practices, we can aspire toward a future where wealth creation benefits all members of society rather than just a privileged few who have mastered the art of monetizing our collective struggles. If this has opened up a new viewpoint for you, there is much more to discover. History holds the answers to many questions. Let me guide you on where to find them. As societies advanced further into the age of industrialization and globalization, debt's role continued to expand dramatically. Credit became accessible to millions who previously had little opportunity to engage with financial markets, creating a culture where consumerism thrived on borrowed money. Yet this accessibility often came at a price. Individuals found themselves ensnared in cycles of repayment that led to unforeseen consequences. In contemporary times, understanding the multifaceted nature of debt is crucial. It influences everything from governmental policies to personal credit scores and even global markets. Awareness surrounding its historical roots can empower individuals and communities alike to navigate this complex landscape more effectively, while fostering discussions about alternative economic models that prioritize well-being over profit. Thus unfolds a tale where debt's invisible grip shapes destinies, one that beckons us all to examine its implications critically as we forge ahead into an uncertain future molded by these enduring financial dynamics. Suddenly, warfare transcended the traditional confines of gold or silver held in royal treasuries. It became possible to finance conflicts indefinitely by essentially selling off future revenues. The Dutch refined this concept, paving the way for England to adopt a similar strategy shortly thereafter. The establishment of the Bank of England in 1694 formalized national debt as an ever-present institution, changing the landscape of government financing. Rather than borrowing from individual lenders, states began to borrow from a central bank that issued banknotes backed by these loans.